The morning sun cast a golden glow over the small town of Riverside as Lisa woke up in her childhood bedroom, for the last time as a single woman. She had dreamed of this day since she was 7 years old, playing dress-up in her mother's old wedding veil. Now 23 years later, that dream was finally becoming reality. Lisa stretched and smiled, feeling butterflies dancing in her stomach. Today, she would marry Jake, the man who had stolen her heart 3 years ago at a coffee shop downtown. She remembered that day perfectly, how he had accidentally spilled his latte on her laptop, then spent the next 2 hours helping her save her work while making her laugh until her sides hurt. Down the hall, her mother was already bustling around the kitchen, making pancakes shaped like hearts. The smell of vanilla and cinnamon filled the house, mixing with the sweet scent of the white roses that had been delivered at dawn. Lisa's younger sister Amy was sitting at the kitchen table, carefully painting her nails a soft pink to match. "The bridesmaids' dresses. I can't believe my baby sister is getting married today," Amy said, blowing on her nails. "It feels like yesterday you were following me around everywhere, begging to play with my Barbies." Lisa laughed, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "And now you're following me around, making sure I don't mess up my own wedding." The house was buzzing with activity. Lisa's Aunt Carol had arrived early to help with the flowers, and her best friend Jenny was upstairs steaming the wedding dress one last time. Every corner of the house seemed to hold a memory. The living room where Jake had asked her father for permission to marry her. The front porch where he had proposed on a warm summer evening 6 months ago. Meanwhile, across town, Jake was having his own morning adventure. His best man, his brother Tom, had woken him up at 6 in the morning by blasting their old college fight song through a Bluetooth speaker. "Rise and shine, groom," Tom had shouted, jumping on the bed like they were kids again. "Today's the day you become a married man." Jake groaned and threw a pillow at his brother, but he was grinning. He had barely slept the night before, not because he was nervous about marrying Lisa. He had never been more sure of anything in his life, but because he was so excited to start their life together. The guys spent the morning at Jake's apartment, which had been transformed into a makeshift preparation headquarters. His father was there, quietly proud and trying not to show how emotional he was getting. Jake's college friends had driven in from different states, filling the small space with laughter and old stories. "Remember when Jake said he'd never get married?" his friend Chris teased while adjusting his tie. "He said he was going to be a bachelor forever, traveling the world with nothing but a backpack." "That was before I met Lisa," Jake replied, looking at himself in the mirror. "Some things are worth changing your plans for." The morning flew by in a whirlwind of final preparations. Lisa's hairstylist arrived at 10, transforming her shoulder-length brown hair into an elegant updo with small white flowers woven throughout. Her makeup artist followed, creating a look that was natural but glowing, exactly what Lisa had requested. "You look absolutely beautiful," her mother said, tears threatening to spill over as she watched her daughter transform into a bride. "Your grandmother would be so proud. She always said you had the kindest heart of anyone she knew." Lisa touched the pearl necklace around her neck, her grandmother's necklace, the something old she had chosen to wear. The something new was her dress, a simple but elegant gown that made her feel like a princess. The something borrowed was Amy's bracelet, and the something blue was a small ribbon sewn inside her dress by her mother. At the same time, Jake was getting ready with military precision. His father helped him with his cufflinks, the same ones his father had worn at his own wedding 30 years ago. Jake's hands were steady as he adjusted his black tie, but his heart was racing with anticipation. "You nervous, son?" his father asked, placing a hand on Jake's shoulder. "Not nervous," Jake replied honestly. "Just excited. I keep thinking about how lucky I am that she said yes." The venue, Willow Creek Gardens, was being transformed into a fairy tale setting. The wedding planner, Mrs. Rodriguez, had been working since dawn with her team to make sure everything was perfect. White chairs were arranged in neat rows, facing a beautiful wooden arch covered in white roses and green ivy. String lights were hung from tree to tree, ready to create a magical glow as the sun set. Lisa had chosen this venue because it reminded her of the park where she and Jake had their first official date. They had walked through the gardens for hours, talking about everything and nothing, and Lisa had known even then that there was something special about this quiet, thoughtful man who listened to every word she said. The flowers were Lisa's pride and joy. She had spent months working with the florist to choose the perfect combination. White roses represented new beginnings, baby's breath symbolized pure love, and the touch of green ivy meant eternal life. Every detail had meaning, every choice was made with love. As noon approached, the wedding party began to gather. Lisa's bridesmaids, Amy, Jenny, and her cousin Rachel, arrived at the house in a flurry of excitement. They had been friends since childhood, and seeing Lisa so happy brought tears to all their eyes. "I remember when you first told us about Jake," Jenny said as she helped Lisa into her dress. "You came home from that coffee shop with this huge smile on your face saying you had met someone special. I knew he was the one when he spent his entire Saturday helping me rewrite my presentation after he spilled coffee on my laptop." Lisa laughed. Most guys would have just apologized and left, but Jake stayed until we figured it out together. The dress fit perfectly, flowing around Lisa like it had been made just for her. The lace sleeves were delicate and feminine, and the train was just long enough to be elegant without being difficult to walk in. When Lisa looked at herself in the full-length mirror, she barely recognized the radiant woman staring back at her. Meanwhile, Jake and his groomsmen were making their final preparations. They had decided to meet at the venue early to take some photos and help with any last-minute setup. Jake wanted to see the space before the guests arrived, to take a moment and appreciate what this day meant. When Jake first saw the decorated garden, he had to stop and catch his breath. It was even more beautiful than he had imagined. The white roses climbing the arch, the chairs perfectly aligned, the soft music playing in the background. Everything was exactly as Lisa had dreamed it would be. "She's going to love this," Tom said, patting his brother on the back. "You two really know how to throw a party." As the afternoon sun climbed higher in the sky, guests began to arrive. Lisa's family had come from 3 different states, and Jake's relatives had traveled even further. The parking area filled with cars, and the garden filled with the gentle buzz of conversation and laughter. Everyone was dressed in their finest clothes, but more importantly, everyone was genuinely happy to be there. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a celebration of 2 people who had found something real and beautiful together, and everyone present could feel that love in the air. Lisa was putting on her final touches when her father knocked on the bedroom door. When she opened it and he saw her in her complete wedding outfit, the strong man who had raised her with such care and wisdom started to cry. "You look absolutely perfect, sweetheart," he whispered, pulling her into a gentle hug. "I'm so proud of the woman you've become, and I'm so happy you found someone who loves you the way you deserve to be loved." The moment everyone had been waiting for was finally here. In just a few hours, Lisa and Jake would be husband and wife, ready to start the greatest adventure of their lives together. The ceremony was absolutely perfect. Lisa had walked down the aisle to her favorite song, her father's arm steady and strong beside her. When Jake saw her for the first time in her wedding dress, he couldn't help but smile so wide that everyone in the audience started smiling too. The love between them was so obvious that even the photographer got a little teary-eyed. They had written their own vows, and there wasn't a dry eye in the garden when Jake promised to love Lisa through all of life's adventures, and when Lisa promised to be Jake's best friend and biggest supporter forever. When the pastor finally said, "You may kiss the bride," the whole crowd erupted in cheers and applause that seemed to echo through the trees. Now 30 minutes later, the reception was in full swing. The cocktail hour had begun, and the garden had transformed into a party atmosphere. The string lights were twinkling overhead as the sun started to set, creating exactly the magical feeling Lisa had always dreamed of. The newlyweds were glowing with happiness as they moved through the crowd, greeting their guests and accepting congratulations. Lisa's dress flowed behind her as she hugged her elementary school teacher, who had made the trip just to see her former student get married. Jake was deep in conversation with his old baseball coach, who was telling embarrassing stories about Jake's high school batting average. "I can't believe how perfect everything turned out," Lisa whispered to Jake as they took a quiet moment together. near the rose garden. Look at all these people who came to celebrate with us. Jake squeezed her hand and looked around at their family and friends. His grandparents were sitting at a table near the dance floor, his grandfather telling animated stories to anyone who would listen. Lisa's college roommates were taking selfies by the photo booth that Amy had set up, complete with silly props and signs. The food was incredible. Lisa and Jake had spent months planning the menu, wanting to serve things that meant something to them. The appetizer table featured mini grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup shots, a tribute to their first home-cooked meal together. There were also stuffed mushrooms from Romano's, the little Italian restaurant where they had their first official date. "Oh my goodness, try these mushrooms," Lisa's Aunt Carol was telling everyone at her table. "They taste exactly like the ones from that fancy place downtown. Lisa has such good taste." Jake's college friends had claimed a table near the bar and were already sharing stories about their adventures together. His roommate David was in the middle of telling everyone about the time Jake had tried to impress Lisa by cooking dinner for her, only to set off the smoke alarm and order pizza instead. "The best part was that Lisa thought it was hilarious," David laughed. "She said any guy who could laugh at himself like that was definitely worth keeping around." The wedding photographer was moving through the crowd like a ninja, capturing all the special moments without being obvious about it. She caught Lisa's grandmother wiping away happy tears as she watched her granddaughter dance with her new husband. She captured Jake's little nephew trying to catch the bubbles that the kids were blowing. His face lit up with pure joy. Jenny, Lisa's maid of honor, was making sure everything was running smoothly. She had a small emergency kit hidden under her chair, safety pins, stain remover, tissues, and pain relievers. So far, the only crisis had been when Lisa's 5-year-old flower girl had gotten chocolate on her dress, but Jenny had cleaned it up so quickly that nobody else even noticed. "You're the best maid of honor ever," Lisa told Jenny during a quiet moment. "I don't know what I would have done without you these past few months." "Are you kidding? This has been so much fun," Jenny replied. "Seeing you this happy makes all the planning and organizing totally worth it." The music was perfect too. Lisa and Jake had created a playlist that told the story of their relationship. There were songs from their first road trip together, the tune that was playing in the coffee shop when they met, and the song Jake had been humming when he proposed. The DJ was reading the crowd perfectly, keeping the energy up without making it too loud for the older guests to have conversations. Jake's father had surprised everyone by requesting a song, the same one he and Jake's mother had danced to at their wedding 30 years ago. When it came on, he asked Lisa to dance, and the two of them glided around the floor while Jake danced with his mother. It was one of those moments that felt like it should be in a movie. "Welcome to the family, sweetheart," Jake's father said to Lisa as they danced. "We couldn't have asked for a better daughter-in-law. Jake hasn't stopped smiling since the day he met you." Lisa felt her heart fill up even more, if that was possible. She had always gotten along well with Jake's parents, but hearing those words made her feel like she truly belonged. The kids at the wedding were having their own party. Lisa's cousin had brought her 3 children, and they had discovered that the garden had a small fountain where they could splash their hands in the water. Amy was keeping an eye on them, making sure they didn't get too wet or too wild. But she was also enjoying watching them have such innocent fun. "Aunt Lisa, Aunt Lisa," the youngest one called out, running over with wet hands and a huge grin. "Did you see me catch the fish in the fountain?" "There aren't any fish in there, silly," Lisa laughed, scooping up the little girl. "But I saw you, having fun, and that makes me so happy." The adult guests were having just as much fun in their own way. Lisa's parents were at a table with Jake's parents, and the 4 of them were looking at baby photos on their phones, already talking about future grandchildren. The conversation was making both mothers a little emotional and both fathers a little uncomfortable, but in the sweetest way possible. Jake's work friends had arrived straight from their office, still wearing their business clothes but ready to party. They had all chipped in to buy the Newlyweds a weekend getaway to a cabin in the mountains, something Jake and Lisa had mentioned wanting to do but never having the time for. "You guys didn't have to do this," Jake said when they presented him with the gift certificate. "This is incredible. Are you crazy? You're like family to us," his coworker Mike replied. Besides, we need you well rested so you can come back to work and tell us all about married life." The sun was getting lower, in the sky, painting everything in a warm golden light that made all the white flowers glow. The photographer was having a field day with the natural lighting, and Lisa and Jake were more than happy to pose for a few more pictures with their families. Lisa's grandmother was sitting in a comfortable chair near the dance floor watching everything with a peaceful smile. She had been married to Lisa's grandfather for 52 years before he passed away, and seeing her granddaughter so happy was bringing back all her own wonderful wedding memories. "Come sit with me for a minute, dear," she called to Lisa. When Lisa sat down beside her, her grandmother took her hands and looked into her eyes. "You look absolutely radiant. This reminds me so much of my own wedding day. Not the details, but the feeling. That pure joy that comes from knowing you found your person." Lisa squeezed her grandmother's hands, feeling the weight of all the love and wisdom in those words. The evening was still young, and everyone could feel that this was going to be a celebration to remember. The dance floor was getting busier. The laughter was getting louder, and the happiness was growing with every passing minute. Nobody had any idea that in less than an hour, this perfect day would turn into an unimaginable tragedy. The golden hour was painting everything in warm, beautiful light as Lisa and Jake made their way to the center of the reception area. The DJ had just announced that it was time for the cake-cutting ceremony, and all their guests were gathering around with cameras ready. The three-tiered cake stood on a white linen table, decorated with the same white roses that had adorned the ceremony arch. Lisa was laughing at something Jake had whispered in her ear as they walked hand in hand toward their beautiful cake. Her dress flowed behind her like something from a fairy tale, and Jake looked so handsome in his black tuxedo with his tie still perfectly straight despite all the dancing and celebrating they had been doing. "Okay, everyone, gather around," called out Mrs. Rodriguez, the wedding planner, who had been keeping everything running smoothly all day. "The bride and groom are ready to cut their cake." The crowd pressed closer, with Lisa's parents and Jake's parents getting the best spots right in front. Amy was recording everything on her phone, determined to capture every precious moment of her sister's perfect day. The photographer was moving around the group, making sure to get shots from every angle. The cake was a work of art. Lisa had worked with the baker for months to get it exactly right. Each layer was a different flavor. Vanilla with strawberry filling for the top, chocolate with raspberry for the middle, and lemon with cream cheese for the bottom. It represented all their favorite desserts from their 3 years together. "This is it, Mrs. Miller," Jake said with a huge grin, using Lisa's new married name for the first time in front of everyone. The crowd awed and cheered at hearing it. "I love the sound of that, Mr. Miller," Lisa replied, her face glowing with happiness. They had decided to both take a new last name together, something that represented their fresh start as a family. Jake picked up the silver cake knife that had belonged to Lisa's grandmother, the same one that had cut her parents' wedding cake 28 years ago. Lisa placed her hand over his, and together they positioned the knife over the bottom layer of the cake. "Make a wish," someone called out from the crowd. Lisa and Jake looked at each other and smiled. "I don't need to wish for anything," Lisa said softly. "I already have everything I could ever want." They pressed down together, cutting through the soft cake while everyone cheered and took pictures. The tradition called for them to feed each other a small piece, and everyone was holding their breath to see if Jake would smash cake in Lisa's face like they had seen at other weddings. But Jake was too much of a gentleman for that. He carefully cut a small piece and gently fed it to Lisa, who closed her eyes and savored the sweet vanilla and strawberry combination. Then Lisa did the same for him, and they both laughed as a tiny bit of frosting stuck to Jake's nose. "You've got a little something right there," Lisa giggled, wiping the frosting away with her thumb. The crowd was eating up every sweet moment, and several of the older ladies were getting teary-eyed watching the young couple be so tender with each other. The cake cutting was supposed to be followed by a champagne toast. Jake's brother Tom had prepared a speech that he had been working on for weeks. He had written it and rewritten it, wanting to find the perfect words to express how happy he was for his little brother and how much he already loved Lisa like a sister. The catering staff began moving through the crowd with silver trays full of champagne glasses. The champagne was sparkling in the evening light, and everything looked absolutely magical. Lisa's maid of honor Jenny was making sure everyone had a glass, including sparkling cider for the kids and the guests who didn't drink alcohol. "Attention, everyone," Tom called out, tapping his glass with a spoon to get everyone's attention. The chatter died down as people turned to listen to the best man's speech. Lisa and Jake stood together in front of their cake, Jake's arm around Lisa's waist, and Lisa leaning into him slightly. They looked so perfect together, so completely happy and in love. Nobody in that garden could have imagined that anything could ever go wrong for such a beautiful couple. Tom cleared his throat and began his speech. "I've known Jake my whole life, and I can honestly say I've never seen him as happy as he's been since he met Lisa. She brings out the best in him, and he brings out the best in her. They're not just husband and wife now. They're best friends, partners, and each other's biggest supporters." The crowd was listening intently, and several people were nodding along with Tom's words. Everyone could see how true they were just by looking at Lisa and Jake together. "So please everyone raise your glasses," Tom continued, lifting his champagne high in the air. "To Lisa and Jake. May your love story continue to be as beautiful as it started, and may you have many, many years of happiness together. To Lisa and Jake." The entire crowd called out in unison, raising their glasses high. Lisa and Jake lifted their champagne glasses and looked into each other's eyes. This was the moment they had been dreaming about, surrounded by everyone they loved, celebrating the beginning of their life together. Lisa's glass caught the light from the string lights overhead, creating tiny sparkles that danced across her face. "I love you so much," Jake whispered to Lisa, just loud enough for her to hear over the crowd. "I love you too," she whispered back. "Forever and always." They brought their glasses to their lips at exactly the same time, both smiling as they prepared to take their first sip as husband and wife. The champagne looked golden and perfect in their glasses, and the bubbles were dancing up to the surface just like they were supposed to. But something was wrong. As soon as the champagne touched Lisa's lips, her smile disappeared. She made a strange face like the champagne tasted bitter or off somehow. Jake noticed her expression and paused before taking his own sip. "Is everything okay?" he asked quietly, concerned by the look on her face. Lisa tried to say something, but instead of words, she started making a choking sound. Her hand went instinctively to her throat, and her eyes went wide with panic. The champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the ground, sending sparkling liquid and glass everywhere. Jake immediately dropped his own glass and reached for Lisa. "Lisa, what's wrong?" But before she could answer, Jake's face suddenly changed too. He had taken a small sip of his champagne just as Lisa started choking, and now he was experiencing the same terrifying sensation. His throat felt like it was closing up, and he couldn't seem to get enough air into his lungs. The guests who had been celebrating just seconds before were now watching in horror as both Lisa and Jake began gasping for air. Lisa grabbed Jake's arm, trying to steady herself, but her knees were buckling and she was starting to collapse. "Someone call 911!" screamed Jenny, immediately rushing to Lisa's side. As a nurse, she could see that this was something much more serious than just choking on champagne. Jake was trying to help Lisa even as his own breathing became more and more difficult. He managed to catch her as she fell, and they both ended up on the ground together, both struggling to breathe and both looking terrified and confused. The beautiful garden that had been filled with laughter and joy just moments before was now filled with screaming and panic. Guests were running toward the couple, others were running away to call for help. The fairy lights were still twinkling overhead, but now they seemed to be lighting up a scene of absolute horror instead of celebration. Amy was crying and screaming her sister's name. Lisa's parents were pushing through the crowd, trying to get to their daughter. Jake's parents were right behind them, their faces white with shock and terror. Jenny was on her knees beside Lisa, checking her pulse and trying to clear her airway. Another guest who was a paramedic was doing the same for Jake. But both Lisa and Jake were getting worse, not better, and everyone could see it. "What's happening to them?" Lisa's mother was crying. "They were fine just a second ago." Nobody had any answers. Nobody understood how two perfectly healthy young people could suddenly be fighting for their lives at their own wedding reception. The champagne glasses lay shattered on the ground, their contents mixing with the evening dew on the grass. Within minutes, the sound of sirens could be heard approaching the garden. But everyone standing around Lisa and Jake could see that time was running out, and they were helpless to do anything about it. The ambulance arrived at Willow Creek Gardens within 8 minutes, but to everyone watching it felt like hours. The paramedics rushed through the garden with their equipment, pushing past the crowd of shocked wedding guests who were still trying to understand what had just happened to the happy couple they had been celebrating with moments before. Lisa and Jake were loaded into separate ambulances, both unconscious now, and hooked up to machines that were helping them breathe. Their families climbed into the ambulances with them, holding hands and praying for a miracle that felt increasingly unlikely with each passing second. At Riverside General Hospital, the emergency room staff was already prepared and waiting. Dr. Patricia Chen, the head of emergency medicine, had been called in specifically for this case. In her 15 years of practice, she had never seen anything quite like this. Two healthy young people in their 20s, both presenting with the same mysterious symptoms at exactly the same time. "What do we know?" Dr. Chen asked the paramedic. As they wheeled Lisa into Trauma Room 1, 26-year-old female collapsed at her wedding reception approximately 20 minutes ago. Started with difficulty breathing and swallowing, progressed to complete respiratory failure. No known allergies, no medical history. Her husband is in the same condition. Dr. Chen frowned. Two people with identical symptoms at the same event usually meant one thing: poisoning. But what kind of poison could work this fast and be this severe? In the waiting room, both families sat together in stunned silence. Lisa's mother was clutching a tissue that was already soaked with tears, while Jake's father paced back and forth, unable to sit still. Amy was on her phone calling Lisa's other relatives to tell them what had happened, though she could barely get the words out. "I don't understand," Lisa's father kept saying. "They were fine. They were laughing and cutting their cake, and then, suddenly..." He couldn't finish the sentence. Jake's mother was holding Lisa's mother's hand, both women drawing strength from each other in their shared terror. "The doctors will figure this out," she said, though her voice was shaking. "They have to." Back in the trauma rooms, Dr. Chen and her team were working frantically to stabilize both patients. Blood samples had been rushed to the lab for immediate toxicology screening. The symptoms, difficulty breathing, rapid heart rate, and neurological problems, were consistent with several different types of poisoning, but they needed to know exactly what they were dealing with to provide the right treatment. "Doctor, we're getting some preliminary results back from the lab," called out Nancy, the head nurse. "They're showing elevated levels of something, but the lab tech says he needs to run more specific tests to identify exactly what it is." "Doctor." Chen nodded grimly. Time was not on their side. Both Lisa and Jake were getting worse despite their best efforts, and without knowing what poison they were dealing with, treatment options were limited. Meanwhile, back at the wedding venue, Detective Mike Rodriguez had arrived to begin investigating what was clearly now a crime scene. The garden that had been decorated for celebration was now cordoned off with yellow tape, and the remaining guests were being interviewed one by one. Detective Rodriguez had been called away from his own family dinner when the hospital reported a possible poisoning case. At 42 years old and with nearly 20 years on the force, he had investigated everything from burglaries to homicides, but a double poisoning at a wedding was something new even for him. "I need everyone to think carefully, Detective," Rodriguez was telling the remaining wedding guests. "Did you notice anything unusual today? Anyone who seemed out of place or anything that didn't seem right?" Most of the guests were still in shock and couldn't think of anything helpful. The day had seemed perfect from start to finish, but Jenny, Lisa's maid of honor, was trying to remember every detail from the reception. "The champagne," she said, suddenly. "They both got sick right after drinking the champagne for the toast. Maybe there was something wrong with it?" Detective Rodriguez made a note and immediately called for the crime scene team to collect samples from all the remaining champagne glasses and the fountain where the champagne had been served. If someone had poisoned the champagne, There might still be evidence. Mrs. Rodriguez, the wedding planner, was cooperating fully with the investigation. She provided a complete list of all the vendors who had worked the event, the caterer, florist, photographer, DJ, and rental company. Each person would need to be interviewed and cleared. "In 30 years of planning weddings, I've never seen anything like this," she told the detective, her hands shaking as she handed over her vendor list. "Lisa and Jake are such wonderful people. Who would want to hurt them?" That was exactly what Detective Rodriguez was trying to figure out. He had already spoken with both families, and neither could think of anyone who would want to harm the couple. Lisa and Jake seemed to live quiet, normal lives. They both had steady jobs, good relationships with their families, and no known enemies. At the hospital, the toxicology results were finally coming in. Dr. Chen studied the lab report with growing concern. The poison that had been used was sophisticated and deadly, not something that could be obtained easily or used by accident. "It's aconitine," she told her team. "It comes from a plant called monkshood. This is definitely intentional poisoning, and whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Aconitine was extremely dangerous and fast-acting. It attacked the nervous system and heart, causing exactly the symptoms that Lisa and Jake had experienced. The fact that someone had access to this particular poison and knew how to use it meant this was a carefully planned attack." Dr. Chen immediately called Detective Rodriguez with the news. "Detective, we've identified the poison. It's aconitine, from monkshood flowers. This wasn't random. Someone specifically chose this poison and knew how to use it effectively." Detective Rodriguez felt his stomach drop. This meant that someone at that wedding had deliberately tried to kill Lisa and Jake. Someone who had sat through their ceremony, watched them cut their cake, and smiled while planning their murder. The investigation took on new urgency as Detective Rodriguez and his team began looking more closely at everyone who had access to the champagne. The catering staff, the wedding planner, family members who had helped with setup, anyone who could have added poison to the champagne fountain without being noticed. Security footage from the venue's parking lot and entrance was being reviewed. Phone records were being pulled. Social media accounts were being searched for any hints of animosity toward the couple. What had seemed like a tragic accident was now clearly a calculated murder attempt. Back at the hospital, both families were called into a private room to speak with Dr. Chen. The news was not good. Despite their best efforts and the fact that they now knew what poison had been used, Lisa and Jake were not responding to treatment. "We're doing everything we can," Dr. Chen said gently. "But I need you to understand that aconitine poisoning is extremely serious. The amount that was used was significant. We're going to keep fighting, but you should prepare yourselves for the possibility that—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Both families understood what she was trying to tell them. Their children, who had been so happy and full of life just hours ago, might not survive their wedding day. Lisa's grandmother, who had been brought to the hospital by other family members, sat quietly in her wheelchair, holding her granddaughter's wedding bouquet. The white roses were already starting to wilt, but she clutched them tightly anyway. "She looks so beautiful today," the elderly woman whispered. "So happy. How could anyone want to hurt someone so sweet?" It was a question that everyone was asking, but no one had an answer for. As the night wore on and the investigation continued, one thing became clear. Someone at that wedding had come with murder on their mind, and they had succeeded in turning the happiest day of Lisa and Jake's lives into an unimaginable tragedy. The question now was who and why. The breakthrough in the case came at 2:47 a.m., almost 9 hours after Lisa and Jake had collapsed at their wedding reception. Detective Rodriguez was reviewing security footage from the venue for the third time when he noticed something that had been easy to miss during the chaos of the investigation. At 5:23 p.m., just 24 minutes before the champagne toast, a figure in catering uniform had approached the champagne fountain. The person moved quickly and purposefully, adding something to the fountain before disappearing back into the crowd. The detective rewound the footage and watched it again, this time focusing on identifying who this person was. The figure was small and moved with familiarity around the venue setup. When Detective Rodriguez finally got a clear view of the person's face, he had to do a double take. It wasn't a member of the catering staff at all. It was Melissa Chen, the wedding florist and someone who had known Lisa since their college days. Detective Rodriguez immediately called for backup and headed to Melissa's apartment across town. He had interviewed her briefly at the venue, and she had seemed appropriately shocked and concerned about what had happened to Lisa and Jake. But now, with this video evidence, everything looked different. When the police arrived at Melissa's small apartment, they found her sitting at her kitchen table as if she had been waiting for them. She was still wearing the same black dress she had worn to the wedding, and her makeup was smeared from crying. But there was something in her eyes that made Detective Rodriguez immediately cautious. "Melissa Chen, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Lisa Miller and Jake Miller," Detective Rodriguez said, reading her rights. Melissa didn't resist or seem surprised. Instead, she just nodded and held out her hands for the handcuffs. "I suppose you found the video," she said quietly. "I wondered if the cameras would catch me." At the police station, Melissa waved her right to an attorney and agreed to tell Detective Rodriguez everything. What she revealed was a story that shocked even the experienced detective and explained the senseless tragedy that had destroyed so many lives in one terrible evening. Melissa had been in love with Jake for over 3 years, ever since Lisa had first brought him to a college reunion gathering. She had watched from the sidelines as their relationship grew stronger, convinced that Jake would eventually realize that she was a better match for him than Lisa was. Lisa was always so casual about everything, Melissa told Detective Rodriguez, her voice bitter and resentful. She never seemed to appreciate how lucky she was to have someone like Jake. She would complain about little things like how he always forgot to put the cap back on the toothpaste, or how he was always 5 minutes late to everything. Detective Rodriguez listened in disbelief as Melissa explained how she had convinced herself that Lisa didn't deserve Jake's love. She had spent months trying to find ways to break them up, sending anonymous messages to Lisa claiming that Jake was cheating, and even going so far as to create fake social media profiles to try to make Jake think Lisa was interested in other men, but none of her schemes had worked. Lisa and Jake's relationship had only grown stronger, and when they announced their engagement 6 months ago, Melissa had felt like her world was falling apart. "I thought about just leaving town," Melissa continued. "Maybe moving somewhere far away where I wouldn't have to watch them be happy together. But then Lisa asked me to do the flowers for their wedding." Melissa had agreed to be the wedding florist because she couldn't bear the thought of someone else creating the beautiful arrangements for Jake's special day. But as she worked on the wedding preparations over the past few months, her obsession had grown darker and more dangerous. She had started researching different types of poisonous plants under the pretense of making sure none of the wedding flowers would be harmful to guests with allergies. That's when she learned about monkshood and its deadly aconitine poison. "I grew the monkshood plants in my greenhouse," Melissa admitted. "It took months to cultivate enough of them and figure out how to extract the poison safely. I told everyone I was experimenting with new types of flowers for my business." Detective Rodriguez asked the question that everyone would want to know. "Why didn't you just poison Lisa? Why did you kill Jake too if you supposedly loved him?" Melissa's answer revealed the true depth of her twisted thinking. "Because if I couldn't have Jake, then no one could. And if Lisa had survived and Jake had died, she would have been remembered forever as his great love. I couldn't stand the thought of that." The detective was horrified by the calm way Melissa was explaining her reasoning, as if murdering 2 innocent people made perfect sense. She had planned everything down to the smallest detail, knowing that she would have access to the reception, set up as the florist. "I volunteered to help with last-minute preparations," Melissa explained. "I told Mrs. Rodriguez that I wanted to make sure the flowers looked perfect for the photos. It was so easy to add the poison to the champagne fountain. Everyone was so busy getting ready for the ceremony that no one was paying attention to what I was doing." As Melissa continued her confession, Detective Rodriguez learned that she had kept a detailed journal of her obsession with Jake and her growing hatred for Lisa. When police searched her apartment, they found the journal filled with disturbing entries dating back almost 2 years. One entry from 3 months before the wedding read, "Watched Jake and Lisa at the grocery store today. She was laughing at something he said. and he looked at her like she was the only person in the world. That should be me. I would appreciate him so much more than she does. Another entry from just 1 week before the wedding was even more chilling. Everything is ready. The poison is prepared, and I know exactly when and how to use it. After tomorrow, Jake and Lisa will finally understand that some love is too powerful to be ignored. The journal also revealed that Melissa had been struggling with severe mental health issues for years, but had hidden them from everyone around her. She had convinced herself that her feelings for Jake were justified and that Lisa was somehow stealing the life that rightfully belonged to her. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Lisa and Jake's conditions had deteriorated throughout the night. Despite the medical team's best efforts and the fact that they now knew exactly what poison had been used, the amount of aconitine in their systems was simply too much for their bodies to process. Dr. Chen had to make the heartbreaking call to both families at 3:15 a.m. Lisa had passed away first at 3:02 a.m. with her parents and sister holding her hands. Jake followed just 13 minutes later, surrounded by his own family and still wearing his wedding ring. The news of their deaths reached Detective Rodriguez just as he was finishing Melissa's confession. Two young people who had done nothing wrong except fall in love and want to celebrate that love with their friends and family were gone forever because of one woman's twisted obsession. When Detective Rodriguez told Melissa that Lisa and Jake had died, she showed no remorse. Instead, she simply said, "At least now they'll be together forever. No one can come between them now." Melissa Chen was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and was eventually sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case shocked the small town of Riverside and made national news as an example of how obsession and untreated mental illness can lead to unthinkable tragedy. The families of Lisa and Jake established a foundation in their memory to support mental health awareness and early intervention programs. They hoped that by sharing their story, they might prevent other families from experiencing the same senseless loss. The beautiful garden at Willow Creek, where Lisa and Jake had planned to start their new life together, was eventually turned into a memorial garden where their friends and family could come to remember the love and joy they had brought to the world during their short time together.